welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show, brought to you as always by progressivechristianity.org, a wonderful place for all your progressive Christian needs, including wonderful resources. Follow them on social media and follow us on Facebook and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. I am joined today, as always, by my good buddy Mark Sandlin. How you doing today, Mark?
I am doing great. I'm so happy to be back. Season 3. We're kicking off. Who would have thought we'd already be on season 3, first episode? And I have missed. We did a live broadcast, but that was several weeks back. I've missed this. Yeah. I'm glad we're back together doing this, man. I'm excited.
Me too. It's good to be back in this format. I enjoy being with you in person, but it's fun to be here in this format as well.
Absolutely.
Today, we are going to be talking about Rebel Moon, and that's going to be a lot of fun. But if you haven't seen it, just know that Mark and I are going to spoil it for you. So if you haven't seen it, decide whether or not you want to know what's going to happen before you listen. But we will have a lot of fun. We'll talk about theology and politics of Rebel Moon. But before we can do that, we got to have some drinks. Do you have a drink, Mark?
I do. You know, I noticed that in the title of this show was Rebel Moon. We happen to be the Moonshine Jesus Show. So I thought maybe I should have a drink made with moonshine.
Ooh, so I like that.
I am having a moonshine margarita, which is basically a good margarita mix, but instead of tequila, moonshine. How about you? What'd you decide to go with?
So I played on the word moon as well, but in a different way. So I didn't use moonshine. I thought about a moon sitting out in space. And so I thought I need a dark drink for space. So I've got a drink that is part bourbon, part Kahlua, and just a little part Coke. And I've got a moon-shaped ice cube. You can't see it because it is so dark, in the space. And there are also some stars floating around that you can kind of
I can see those stars in there.
So it's sparkling there. So it's out in space. So cheers to you, Mark. I hope you enjoyed that moonshine margarita. Let's have a sip and come back.
Oh, that's going to be dangerous.
Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello, welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. You're joining us for our Geek Out segment where we are going to geek out about this show. We'll keep this one a little bit shorter than our next segment where we'll start talking about the theopolitical perspectives in this. But just to kind of set you up so you'll know what's going on, this is a show about the main character, Cora, who's a lone wolf soldier who's found community and connection on a quiet farming moon called Velt. And she's basically a long way away from her former life, fighting for the Imperium. If that sounds like empire, there might be reasons for that. But fighting for the Imperium and a brutal interstellar royal empire that's bent on controlling the galaxy. But Cora's violent past is dredged up when the sadistic, and I do mean sadistic, Admiral Atticus Noble comes to Velt via dreadnought-class battle cruiser and stirs up deadly trouble on the orders of the Imperium's tyrannical regent, Belisarius, who happens to be her adopted father. And then lots of battles ensue as they begin to try to overcome the Imperium with their band of, go figure, rebel fighters. So, Caleb, I'm curious. This show, part 1, this is a Zack Snyder joint here. He imagined this while I think he was even in college. It was meant to be a response to Star Wars, or maybe a part of Star Wars. He even pitched it to this whole group over at Star Wars and was turned down. Maybe it was too dark. I don't really know what ultimately was the thing. Ultimately, episode 1 or part 1 is going to come in 2 parts. Love, hate, or something in between?
I feel kind of it was okay.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I think whenever you pitched this, you said it's all right, and I think that's how I felt about it. It's all right. I enjoyed watching it. It was very Zack Snyder. It was, I mean, visually very dark in the way that Zack Snyder makes all of his movies. It had the same kind of, a number of action scenes that were extended with plenty of slow motion, plenty of close-ups on the barrels of their blasters, and all of these things that are just kind of token
classic Zack Snyder's.
Yeah. So I guess I kind of feel like about this, Mark. Like I think the Star Wars folks made the right decision not allowing Zack Snyder to make a Star Wars movie. Because I think kind of maybe he doesn't he misunderstands kind of the point of Star Wars in the same way that I think it's the right move for Star Trek not to let Quentin Tarantino make a Star Trek movie, because ultimately at the end of the day, I'm not sure that he understands what it's about. So that's kind of my impression. It feels very Zack Snyder. It was a fun watch. Am I aching to see part 2? Not really. How about you? Do you have a different impression?
Well, first of all, for the sake of the show, we will be watching part 2, just so everyone out there knows.
I know. I'm just not going to ache to see it, you know?
But I do kind of agree with you. I'm indifferent about whether I get to see it. I am going to watch part 2. No, I'm kind of with you. I found it to be something in between. It was fun. It was fun in the same way of any show that is great to have on when I'm doing something else, but need a slight distraction. But unfortunately, it's also not the kind of movie that you can watch distracted, because there's too many levels. There's too much dialogue going on. There's too many characters. Talk about the number of characters. Oh my gosh.
There are a lot of characters.
It's one of the things that kills me in trying to do these sort of review shows, are the ones that have immense amount of characters. I'm bad with names to start with. It makes it really difficult. So it is fun. It's the kind of fun movie that would be great to have in the background, but it's also a movie you can't really afford to just have in the background. Visually incredible. Stunned. Like every shot is a piece of art. I believe that Snyder's mom was an artist, and he learned a lot from her. He was even the visual director of this, and it shows up at how beautiful it is. The writing, man. I think it's time for Snyder to realize that he is a big picture visual person. He understands what would make a good story. He understands what visually creates a masterpiece of something that's engaging. I think he needs to learn to and admit he is not the best at writing the story. He doesn't do very good at creating characters that we care about, or that we engaged in.
I think that's 100% accurate. I did feel like it was visually very stunning. I thought there was some sloppy CGI, especially in the like on the planet where King Levitica was, like that. That looked kind of video game-ish. But I think generally it did look pretty good. But he doesn't establish characters that you really get invested in, and that's because he doesn't do the hard work of making you care about the character. So, for instance, like Korra had multiple love interests in this show, but I wasn't invested in who she chose. Like the person she was seeing, I don't know that we even really met. There was just kind of, we saw him from a distance or something. We didn't even know who he was then. So I didn't really care who she wound up with. I didn't feel like I knew enough about her to be real invested on whether or not she succeeded. I didn't feel like I knew enough about her community to care. And so, yes, I think that's the classic Zack Snyder problem. Because, he just has finished DCEU stuff, right? And We didn't care about any of those characters that he directed either.
Yeah.
And those are characters that have an 80-year history.
Absolutely.
So yeah, he doesn't get
And
it.
how do you have a movie that is full of heroes? As a matter of fact, we have a whole segment, and I want to get to talk about this segment a little bit, where they go and round up heroes. And so the whole point of this seems to be the direction we're heading in, is that a small group of rebel heroes can overthrow a giant empire. And then how do you do that, but write it in a way that we don't care about them? I mean, and part of it is his issue.
He didn't do the hard work.
Yeah, he didn't, and part of it, I think, is a personal issue. Maybe I don't know him, so I'm guessing at this. But when he writes, and we see that in this movie, there is a lack of certain types of emotions that we want to see out of our heroes, so that we can identify with them. If you think about the characters in this show, predominantly the emotions that the main characters show are either stoic or mad.
Yeah. Again, classic Zack Snyder.
Right, exactly. But that's what he writes over and over again. And those just aren't emotions that we will fully identify with. We'll kind of understand them, and we'll go, I know why you're there. And it sets up the angst and that we need to make for a decent story. But he just never really shows enough other stories. He also doesn't do a lot of backstory. Like and as a matter of fact, rather than showing us the backstory, he might visually put up a little bit of a picture, but then he'll have the character dialogue the backstory. And rather than having a flashback fully play out without the character dialoguing over it, which is another way of making us not care. Hearing someone talk about what happened in the past as some of the video of what happened in the past is being seen, you lose that connection. You don't feel like they're going through it, and you want to go through that with them, you know?
Yeah, I 100% agree, because this band of heroes that we see collected, we don't really even learn about all of them. We saw some visuals for some of them, but not all of them. So who cares if they, like, whenever the guy sacrifices himself, right?
Right.
Who even cared? We just met him.
Know enough about it.
We had no emotional stake. That's right. And I think this is why he doesn't work as a Star Wars director, right? Because fundamentally, that is a movie about hope.
Yep.
And is this a movie about hope? I don't.
It's certainly not yet. So let's go back to the gathering of the heroes. That story, that little stretch of that kind of section of the movie. What did you think about that? One, here's part of my perspective. Right up until that point, it was kind of moving. It wasn't a rapid pace, but it was a good pace. And they were telling a story and letting it kind of unfold. And then all of a sudden, we need people to fight with us. And it felt like it was like bam, 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 bam. We have our heroes. Did it come off like that to you? Except for one. And I'll come back to that one. It felt like that, right?
Yeah, right. Yes, it did. And it didn't feel like we really had much of an explanation as to why that was necessary, other than we did need some people to fight. So like the guy who was helping her, find these folks. When he ultimately, or no, he's the guy.
He's the guy.
No, the guy she met in the bar.
The guy that is the twist.
Who's the twist? Like, which wasn't a surprise, because they didn't spend any time making us feel like they were connected in any way, other than like a couple of jokes. Right. And so like he ends up betraying them. Well, that's not a surprise. They met this guy in a bar, and he's gonna
and when they meet him
to drive them around the galaxy.
And then when they meet him, he's betraying someone, and he basically says, "Yeah, you can't trust me. This is what I did."
That's right. That's right. Kai is his name. Yeah. Kai. And so, no, it didn't feel like if there was much on the line, much at stake, or like I cared much about any of them.
And then they went so fast through gathering them that we really, like you said, we didn't get any backstory on them. We find out one was a prince or a king or something, but we only find that out after a lot of stuff has already happened. You never feel invested. And then there's this one character that I thought, it felt like they just kept, like, in comparison to the other heroes, they stretched it out. His name was Tarak. The one that was a slave, and then
breaking.
And then he helps tame the bird, the giant bird. And they spent a crazy amount of time comparatively getting him out and having him train the bird and showing how good he interacts with these large beasts. And then they did nothing with it.
But we didn't.
Why did
and we didn't learn anything about him. We didn't learn anything about him. I'm like, and then they made reference to him being a prince, and I'm like, wait, he was a prince?
Right.
Why was he a prince?
And I don't know.
We didn't
maybe
learn anything about how any of that happened.
And maybe in part 2, his ability to like interact with animals is going to be a big deal. I don't know. It just felt like, why are we spending so much time on this when the rest of them? The other exception might be the sword fighter. They did spend a little time showing how skilled she was. It just felt like that's Zack Snyder showing off how great he is at fight scenes, because he is great at fight scenes.
Yes.
But it just, I don't know, that whole thing, it all felt contrived, and it felt like that happened too fast, and they did it in such a pace that it just didn't care about anybody. So what did you think then of the overall world that Snyder created here? He had to, he was setting it originally on a edge of the Star Wars universe, was what his plan was, but then he was told he couldn't do that. And so he had to kind of reset up the whole thing with the Imperium and all of that kind of thing. What did you think about the whole world setting that he created here?
So I agree that it was visually very stunning, that we got to see a lot of things, and that felt nice. Although I don't know. I feel like there are other sci-fi movies that have done this a lot better outside of Star Wars. I mean, clearly he's mirroring Star Wars, but I felt visually like it was stunning, but I didn't feel real connected to the world building that he was doing. And maybe it's because I didn't fully grasp exactly how the Imperium came to be, about what the motherland was about, other than this great evil, and how the moon that she was on tied into it all, other than they had their small community and they were producing grain. So again, for me, that's a little bit of a meh. How about you?
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of on the same page. I felt like there were certain things that were done really well. Velt felt like a real planet to me. Felt very real. I felt like it was tangible. I felt like I understood the people there. A lot of the alien characters that they built, I thought were very cool and interesting and engaging in a lot of ways. But then the world felt very small at the same time, because when they would travel to these other planets, they kind of didn't introduce us to the planet. They were just on wherever to do the thing, and then they left the planet. And so the world, it's supposed to be like a space opera. It's supposed to feel massive, and it never really it felt massive. You could just visually, you could tell the difference between the planets, or the okay, this is where that one is, and this was in a different one. But you just, like you said, it didn't do anything to make me care or be invested. Or so again, I think it comes back down to, in my opinion, Snyder really needs to get a great writing partner who can listen to him set these massive ideas of what a story is going to be, and then have a person who can then write it in a way that makes us care about it. Listen, we could keep geeking out, and I imagine we would, but we also need to move on and get to the work that we've been here to do, and that is to begin to think about this from theological and political perspectives. So we're going to have a quick drop, and we'll come back on the other side and talk about that.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We're entering our Theopolitico segment, where we're going to talk about theology and politics of Rebel Moon. As we mentioned, maybe there was some story left to be desired when we were watching Rebel Moon, but there is a lot of Theo and Politico overtones, I think, here that are a little meaty. And so I want to start out by talking a bit about politics,
Yeah.
Mark. And so the motherland is very much like the Roman Empire. And in case we miss it, they even have gladiatorial combat
Right.
so that we can make the connection. Which got me thinking, Rome is very much vilified in the Bible. And we've talked a lot about on this show how Jesus is standing up to empire. But in secular society, we often look back to Rome, and I think particularly the Roman Republic, as an ideal example of what representative democracy ought to look like. And so I'm curious, Mark, this is something that I remember even as a kid thinking, there's a juxtaposition here between how we talk about Rome in civics class and how we talk about Rome in church. How do we reconcile those two things?
Oh, well, great question. It's a big question. In some ways, I just flash forward to the United States right now. And and we think of ourselves as this great democracy, and you have all this history that kind of tries to celebrate how great of a democracy is. But when the push comes to shove, and we're down on the ground and we're looking at what the realities are, how it impacts people, what's going on, we see that it's very imperfect. It's great to be able to be the people who get to tell the story because you can shape it in any way you want. And I think what we have in biblical times is Jesus responding to what we saw as some of the realities of what the Roman Empire really was like and the way that it really did impact people. And so for me, that's the way I wouldn't call reconcile it, but you make sense of it. You recognize that, for having the best concepts and understanding this is how it should be, and this is the way that we believe that we're operating, but then look at the actual outcomes and the impact on the average and typical person, those can have great differences. And our job as followers of Christ are to spot those things and point at them and name them and say, we need to change them. We need to make them better, even if we're hearing this larger story that this is a perfect democracy and things are running the way that they're supposed to. It's just, that's true of every nation. If the nation gets to tell its own story, it's going to sound great. If the people of the nation individually get to tell the story, it might not sound so great. I mean, at least that's my beginning take on it. What would you say?
Yeah, I get it. It's a big, complicated question, and we're talking about several centuries of time here. And I think that's important to recognize that the Roman Republic is different from the Roman Empire too. Right. That we had someone grab power and Caesar and stay in power, at which point it transitioned from a democracy to an empire, right? And so I think that has relevance for us as we're going into this election. And we saw, the last time Donald Trump was president, an attempted coup to stay in power. And so I think I very much see a parallel here between what happened with the Roman Republic becoming the Roman Empire and the United States. I think we very much operate as empire as it is. But I think there has been and continues to be a real danger of someone usurping power to kind of keep control. So that makes me curious too, Mark, as Christians going into 2024, which we are now election year. What is it that we as Christians ought to be doing to ensure that doesn't happen?
Right.
That we don't get Donald Trump again.
I think one of the things that we have to do is to get past this nonsensical idea that Christians shouldn't be political. Maybe we shouldn't be naming names and picking that kind of sides. But when it comes to the issues of this election, we need to be outspoken. We need to educate ourselves. We need to find resources that will help us understand what really solid theological perspectives about the hot button topics are, so that we can have these discussions with other people, maybe particularly folks who are finding themselves in the middle ground, who aren't decided yet, who identify as Christian and are hearing a lot of their conservative friends claim that if you're a Christian, you have to vote for Trump or you have to vote for whoever. We need to be making sure that we're educating ourselves enough that we realize what the real risk of these issues are, that we understand what the loving outcome of each one of these hot buttons would be and how to go about getting to them, and then helping other people understand what a true follower of the teachings of Jesus would be thinking about these issues. And then we got to get out and vote, and we got to get a lot of folks to understand that that is essential, particularly this year. What do you say?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think particularly when we see a candidate who is claiming to be the Christian candidate and doesn't have any idea what Jesus actually taught, we ought to see as morally problematic. And Christian leaders who endorse that kind of behavior and act as if, say, Donald Trump is the Christian candidate, we ought to really, if we consider ourselves to be Christians, we ought to really do some soul searching as to what that means when Christian leaders are willing to give up biblical principles in favor of a candidate. And we got to be willing to call that out. And I think that's going to be super important this year. Indeed. Something I'm sure we're going to be talking about
a lot.
Yeah. So I want to pivot a little bit. I want to talk about some theology here in terms of Isa, who is kind of the princess that we don't get a lot of insight into, other than seeing in a couple of scenes and flashbacks. And we find out that Isa has this power to give life. And I thought that was interesting. And so Cora says, I saw on more than one occasion things that I couldn't explain. And so that made me wonder, Mark, in the Bible, Jesus is credited with lots of things that are beyond explanation. Miracles, exorcisms, resurrections. How do we make sense of those things, Mark?
Well, I think really the quote from our main character, Cora, helps us, I think, with that, in that she saw things she couldn't explain. That doesn't mean that her explanation of them is what actually happened. Now, of course, in this setting and in this fantasy world, it probably is what actually happened, but it does point to a way that we need to learn to approach biblical times in the pre-scientific age, is that frequently when something happened that a person couldn't give any rational explanation to, at least in terms of their understanding of how the world worked, there would be what ultimately are sort of irrational explanations of it, because it seemed to explain what they thought they saw. So I think that's part of what we need to make sure that we're paying attention to when we see these things that just are scientifically, we know they could not be true. So what's going on here? And is the Bible lying, or is someone telling a falsehood? And recognize that in some cases, and it's certainly not for all the pieces that were in there. In some cases, it was just the writers trying to make sense of what happened. In some cases, it was trying to lend a bigger story to a person who had a massive impact on a lot of folks, and needing to attach stories to say, that person was pretty special. Let me tell you this really unbelievable story so you'll understand how special they were.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And also, recognizing that in an ancient world where they didn't understand physical and mental ailments in the same way that we do today, that it's likely that Jesus did go around and do whatever it was that ancient healers did that in a pre-scientific world, and that's okay for us to say that that's part of what he was doing, even though that's not what we understand today, and we don't understand anything miraculous as happening from that. But I agree that we can see Jesus as being compassionate in that way, without having to explained away via magic. And I think that's an important entry point for progressive Christians. Absolutely. So another thing about one of those scenes, Mark, where Isa was giving life to a bird that had died, it made me think of the infancy gospel of Thomas, where Jesus
Made a little
has these birds that are fashioned out of mud, right?
Yep.
And he claps and they come to life.
Yeah.
And so I don't know why that image came to
It's
my
great.
head
It's
as
a great
soon as
connection.
I saw that. It's kind
Yeah.
of fun. So that made me think. We haven't talked a lot about non-canonical gospels here, and I'm curious, Mark, for Christians today, are those of any use to us?
Yeah, they're incredibly useful. There was just a group of people who were being led by, speak of Rome, of the Roman leader, who chose what was going to go into the Bible. And sometimes it was for good reasons, and sometimes it was for political reasons. And so these other books, a lot of them, the infancy narratives are one, were actually used more than by the churches of the day, were used more than some of the books that made it into the Bible, because they did more of what the emperor wanted. So yeah, if what we approach the text for is to begin to have an understanding of what the folks of that day and age thought of, in this particular case, their rabbi Jesus, and how they tried to make sense of and understand who Jesus was, they're essential. I think they lend some insight that we might not gain otherwise, and they also can teach us a lot about the Gospels that are canonical and tell us some of the stories and backgrounds and some of the traditions that led to what we have. So I find them fascinating and frequently very, very helpful. I'm sure you've used them before, even in sermons and that kind of thing, right?
Oh, I have. I love to read from them because they're fun.
Mhm.
I mean, like birds coming to life,
Right.
and I mean, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas is a lot of fun. And I agree that I think they're helpful in understanding what people believed at the time.
Yeah.
I think they're less helpful in understanding who the historical person of Jesus was,
Sure.
with the exception of the Gospel of Thomas, not the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, but
quotes.
the Gospel of Thomas. Yeah, the quotes. I think it was early, and I think that
so
one's
too.
helpful. So, but I think they're a lot of fun to read. Hey, I've got a lot more theological and political questions, but we're out of time. So, if we continue down this road, we won't get to go to our favorite segment, the Make Me Look Stupid segment, and we got to get there. So, why don't we take a quick break, have another drink, come back, and try and make each other look stupid.
Welcome to our Make Me Look Stupid segment. It's a segment where we commence to try to make our co-host look stupid, or just ask a question that we're really kind of can't figure out ourselves and are very curious to find out what their thoughts on it are. I had several questions. I always try to be prepared because you like to steal my questions. This time around, I did pretty well. I don't think we really stole any of them. But I'm just going to continue down the path of Princess Izza that we were talking about. I'm curious. Why would you introduce a character with Princess Izza's abilities that we just talked about and then kill her off? She was killed in the war before everything that happened. What's the point here? What do you think's going on?
I think we're going to have a stronger connection to her in part 2. And I think we're going to see her being a major catalyst for Korra. I mean, and I think maybe she's not dead. I think she's coming back and is playing some kind of a role. I don't know exactly what that role's going to be yet, but I don't think we've seen the last of Princess Izza. I think she's coming. She's going to be in part 2, and I think she's still alive.
Yeah.
How about you? What do you think?
I agree. I think she's still alive. I think that Korra's adopted dad, Belisarius, who rose into power as a senator and somehow now is in charge. I think that he spread this story that she was killed and that she wasn't really killed. And much like he tried to do with Korra, he's trying to get her to be part of his movement, and he sees how valuable that would be. And I think, I think she and Korra will connect again, and she'll play a very important role going forward. I at least hope that that's what's happening, and that it's not just another example of bad writing. So we'll see.
Well, yeah, maybe, but well, it's already filmed. Probably the part 2. There's no getting another.
No, it comes out in
writer.
April, so they're bound to be in editing
It's
already.
done.
Yeah.
It's done. Yeah. Okay. Well, so I want to ask another question on Princess Issa. So this is really interesting because she didn't play really much of.
We got 2 little flashbacks that were short.
But clearly impactful. So one of the things that was, I think impactful for people who are talking about theology, because she's clearly presented as the Messiah figure, as Jesus.
Absolutely.
And so she's even called Chalice and Redeemer.
Yep.
And so I'm curious. They said that she's the daughter of the king. There are prophecies about her being born in the flesh to usher in a new age of peace. So these are clearly messianic kind of allegories here. And as I was listening to that, especially her name as Redeemer, it made me wonder, even in a lot of progressive churches, there's a lot of talk about God being creator,
Right.
God the creator, God the sustainer, the Holy Spirit, God the Redeemer, Jesus. How do you feel about the notion of Jesus as Redeemer? Is it theologically helpful to understand him in that way? Is it valuable or not?
In the way that it's typically used, I don't find a lot of value in it. I think it kind of pushes off responsibilities. In terms of Redeemer, in terms of redeeming the outlook of humanity and redeeming the way that we understand who we are supposed to be, and any tendencies towards negative and seeing people as other, that could be helpful, but that's not really how we end up using it. And so I think it's actually really damaging. I don't think that there's anything particularly helpful about putting that in someone's hands, because you can just push it off into the future and just go, well, we don't have to worry about it because, in the second coming, the Redeemer will be here and things will all be for the better. So at least in the way I've seen it used, it's bad theology. What about you?
I really struggle with this because a lot of denominations use this language, creator, redeemer, sustainer, and I think they try to use it in that way to skew the masculine language of like a Trinitarian formula, like Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
And lots of appreciation for recognizing the need to do that.
Right.
But about the choice.
We're still thinking about God in the same way, though. It's not. I mean, is that really a progressive understanding of God, or is it just like a recognition, like, oh, well, maybe God's not an old guy in the sky, so we should like use some language? So I kind of have a problem with that because I don't think it's really a great understanding of God or a real biblical understanding of God. The Trinity, I don't feel like is very biblical to begin with.
Definitely not.
And so. So I have a problem with that. I have a problem in thinking about Jesus as the Redeemer of humanity, and certainly like the Redeemer of our souls. But I guess I can understand how, like, if we're thinking about living our lives towards a model of peace, justice, love, and compassion,
redeeming us towards that,
haven't lived our life. Yeah, that kind of can.
Yeah, but let's be honest. Kind of let's be honest. You have to work hard to get it there because that's not what most people are using it for. So, is it worth really working?
No, they're not.
Is it worth really using it, working that hard? Are we trying to reclaim a word that we shouldn't be using anyway? I kind of feel like that's where.
Okay, so it sounds like you and I both, Mark, are thinking maybe that's not the best formula. So I've got a part 2 of my question, assuming that we might end up there, which is what kind of language should churches use to replace that model with?
I don't think they should, because it's intentional Trinity language. And as you've pointed out, and I've written quite a few articles on and had some even sermons on, the Trinity in general is bad theology that's not biblical in any way whatsoever. And the only thing useful about it, in my opinion, is that it does set up an understanding of God being a God of relationship. And if there is anything valuable in it, it is that it points to that we can best understand God in relationships. But outside of that, I find it not helpful. Even trying to reclaim it in a way that might point towards that, I think there's just too much baggage that comes along with it, and that we need to walk away from it. That's what I do.
Okay, I'm good. I'm good with walking away from it. I don't ever use Trinitarian language anyway. But I hear it a lot.
Yeah, it's around a lot.
Denominations.
It really is. So, and I'm not sure what folks believe are helpful about it. It just isn't. There's nothing about it that's biblical. And sometimes we do things that aren't biblical, but they usually come with a good reason where you can see, oh, okay, that's actually kind of helpful. That's good. And the Trinity, I don't see anything that ultimately moves us forward in a more positive way than not using it.
Okay, let's get rid of it. I'm good. I'm good with that.
Fair enough.
You and I already have.
We're right there.
Oh.
Yep.
Well, Mark, this has been fun.
It's been a lot of fun. Can
we do something next week?
We got to talk next week. Disney has dropped all of the 5 episodes for the show Echo. And I think that's something that we should. One of the Marvel ones. It's a really interesting. Echo is a Native American. Her name is Maya. And it's the story. We got introduced to her already in some other Marvel shows. She is raised by Fisk, if you remember Fisk, the big man out of Daredevil, and he kind of semi-adopts her, and this is a story of her rebelling against him and her trying to get him trying to get her to be part of his empire, and her realizing that he's responsible for the death of her father, and her reconnecting to her Native American roots. So it's a lot of richness going on. I think this would be a fun thing to talk about, man.
Oh, I think so too. And Fisk is Vincent D'Onofrio, right? And he did a great job in that role. He's just
such
fantastic.
A great villain.
So I'm really excited to revisit that. Oh, he is a great villain.
Yeah, absolutely.
And such a great character actor.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, that'll be our next show. So make sure you catch those. They're 5 episodes, and they're all relatively short. None of them run an hour at all. And I've already watched it. It's really good. So I encourage everyone to do that. Hey, and thank you all. Whether you're watching live or broadcast online, or whether you're listening back on the podcast, we always want to make sure that you know how grateful we are for you, that we get to do this because you show up and listen or show up and watch. And so thank you. And until the next time, enjoy the Moonshine Jesus Show.
Moonshine Jesus.